What I want to do is explore the deeper issues in the international system.
Social media broke that centralization. We saw what happened in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Vietnam. Beforehand, it was kicked out. The American ambassador had to flee the embassy in his pajamas.
We really should be actively participating in a decline of this superpower, in a decline of this empire.
If you believe the system is being bent out of shape, what it should say to you is, how can I bend it further?
Are we not giving oxygen to a system that would otherwise collapse under its own strains?
So the calculations of Starmer and of Biden in the US, as long as these people don't engage with the system, I'm safe.
Can you at least accept that at least Iran has used its autonomy far better than the shameless Arab rulers?
I'm saying the argument that Iran is good because it helped Palestine is a flawed argument. Somebody said to me in a masjid, we're making dua for TikTok. I said, yes.
Gaza has become our teacher. It has taught us a lot about the world around us and ourselves. For some of us, it has woken us up from a slumber, a comatose state the current world order demands from us. For others, however, it has spread inertia and hopelessness and despair. We have made new friends, forged by a cause that is greater than ourselves, and learned to understand who we really are. In that process, our daily travails have become just a little less important, and the quest for justice has deepened within our souls. This is how Gaza has become our educator. It has truly led to a spiritual awakening. Gaza has also taught us the need to understand the world more deeply. But as Gaza is placed in a broader context, we have begun to appreciate just how our political inadequacies as an ummah has led us to this most horrendous of situations, where a genocide can take place in real time, an ambient genocide as one commentator called it. Yet this is juxtaposed with scenes from an intoxicated West, deafened to the cries of mothers and children. So how do we conceptualize where we are, the international situation, and what comes next? To help us understand ourselves and the world, we are happy to invite back onto the Thinking Muslim our friend Sami Hamdi. Now let me remind all viewers that to help us to continue to engage critical thought at this most critical time, please consider becoming a patron. More information in the pinned comment. Also, please remember to subscribe to this podcast. Jazakallah khair. Sami Hamdi, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the Thinking Muslim.
Thank you very much for having me, Jelle.
Well, I really appreciate that you've taken some time out to see us. I know you're jet-setting around the world as usual, alhamdulillah, and you've just returned back to the UK. What's next for you, by the way? You've just come back from the US?
Alhamdulillah, come back from the US, then Canada, US again, and then August is spent, mostly in Bosnia. Usually my Augusts are in Bosnia, alhamdulillah, so I'll spend there for a while, and then I might back and forth States, Japan, some other places as well by the time September starts, another rush, inshallah. But alhamdulillah, I mean, it's one shouldn't complain. One should say alhamdulillah for the honor to be invited and spread these messages, alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah. Well, we are honored as always, Sami, for you to come to our show, and there's some critical things to discuss since the last time we spoke, which was a few months back now. The situation in Gaza has remained, has actually worsened, and we have an international situation which is in flux. We've spoken about the United States, Israel, the Muslim rulers and their inaction. I suppose today what I want to do is explore the deeper issues in the international system and how Gaza exposes them, or whether Gaza does expose these deeper problems. Now, let's start with what we call the US-based rules order. What does the genocide in Gaza tell us about the centrality of the US in this order?
I think that when we talk about the US-based rules order, I think it's important to highlight and stress that the abnormalities in the current global order was exposed before the US and even during the US itself. Whenever we talk about the Palestine issue in and of itself, the whole idea of the British Mandate and the League of Nations that even proposed the idea of a partition of Palestine between the Zionists and between the owners of the land, the Palestinians themselves, Muslims, Jews, Christians, and the like. I think that it's important to remember that League of Nations at the time was composed of the main colonial powers. And when we read history, we often overlook this particular point because we see it as some sort of grand organization where the world had come together to discuss its affairs. We forget that the composition of these bodies were colonial powers. US emerges as a power after World War II, cements itself in the 1960s and the like. The same concept of this rules-based order, rules determined by the powers of the day, rules determined by those able to wield power, able to deploy power. The idea being, I think Samuel Huntington is the one who said, the West often forgets it didn't win the world by its values, it won it by its ability to organize force most effectively, in contrary to the ideas of Islam, which managed to spread far and wide because people embraced the ideas so wholeheartedly that even when they were persecuted or invaded by other powers and taken over by colonizing powers, they never left their religion, never left their deen. And Algeria is always the best example, 132 years of colonization. At the end of it, the Algerians chant, "Oh Muhammad, oh Prophet Muhammad, congratulations, we returned Algeria to you." Meaning no matter the physical colonization, the hearts always remained with Islam in a way that Western values have never been able to grasp or ever been able to grab. The reason why I move away from the US-based global order is in order to emphasize that global orders in and of themselves are defined by power, and then it is determined whether they use that power to uphold justice or not. And then Allah gives the cycle of fortunes for different powers. If they choose to uphold justice, Allah gives them glory. If they choose not to give them justice, they eventually see themselves in decline. The same way we saw the British Empire in decline, replaced by the US global power, and the US power now being in decline as you're seeing Russia, China, BRICS, and all these other organizations emerge in and of themselves. I think that to say that Gaza exposed it would undermine how Iraq exposed the abnormalities in the global order. When we saw million-man marches here in London, essentially even Piers Morgan himself coming out and saying that this is wrong, this is illegal, and this is a clear aberration of what the law is supposed to achieve. We saw the protests with regards to Afghanistan as well. Even after 9/11, the popular opinion still saw that there was an aberration of law and an abuse of power in terms of how the US and Western states were using it. So I think if the question is, how does Gaza expose it? It was exposed a long time ago, and I don't think people are under any illusion with regards to this. What Gaza did, however, was dislodge the ability of these powers to exercise power in the way they have been used to in the past. And I'll explain what I mean.
Please, yeah.
In Iraq, the US was able to get Tony Blair of the United Kingdom, able to get some of these other Western states, France initially opposed and the like, but it was able to get Western states on board, and Ukrainian troops themselves were the first troops to enter Baghdad in Iraq. Sort of irony in terms of what's happening in Ukraine today.
Yeah.
The point here being is that in Iraq, they were able to mobilize and push the international community to lend them a cover under which they were able to embark on Iraq. Afghanistan, they were able to leverage the international community in a way to lend them cover to go into Afghanistan. With Gaza, it's abundantly clear that the Biden administration is unable to get any international cover for what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. Yeah. You have Macron coming out calling for a ceasefire, Macron, the president of France, and you have Macron coming out and saying that we need to respect the ICC when it issues an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. You have Germany on the one hand defending the Israelis' propaganda in Germany itself, but when Biden demands it takes a stance on the ICC, Germany comes out and says, this is too far for me. We will arrest Netanyahu if he enters Germany, if the ICC issues an arrest warrant. We see Belgian Deputy Prime Minister coming out and saying we need to sanction the Israelis. We're seeing Spain, Norway, and Ireland break ranks with the US administration and coming out and recognizing a Palestinian state despite the Biden administration lobbying against that. We're seeing the International Court of Justice come out and rule that Israel has to be dragged on trial for genocide, and an American judge ruling in favor of Israel being held to account with regards to genocide, leading to Japanese companies cutting their relations with Israeli companies, leading to Moody's downgrading Israel's economy. All of this, the US is unable to intervene and uphold this rules-based order that was designed to protect the hegemony and the power, not of the US, because it was established before the US, but not over the US, or not necessarily before the US became a superpower, that's what I mean. But the point is to uphold a rule, an order that allows the US to exert power in the way that it does. What Gaza has done is, it's really removed the ability of the US to move the international community in the way that it's done in the past because of the sheer barbarity of what's happening. And secondly, because of social media. Because social media decentralized the communications ability, the ability to communicate with the world. Because before social media, the US would communicate through CNN, New York Times. through a select group of elite individuals in control of the media, and the narrative would be fed. And while there would be some rebellion here and there was a general limited control over the narrative. Social media broke that centralization, which means no state is able to control the narratives anymore. Wikipedia today, at the time of this recording, has come out and said that the Israeli lobby organization, the ADL, is now going to be cited on Wikipedia as an unreliable source on Israel and on anti-Semitism. We're seeing this rebellion from decentralized media. Social media is making the difference in that it's moving public opinion in such a way that the US is unable to move international institutions in a way that allowed it to monopolize them for its own unique interests. So has Gaza exposed the aberrations of international order? Gaza did it in the same way Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, and they saw the genocide, it was being broadcast, and nobody called it a genocide until near Travnik. There is a mountain near Travnik, the Bosnians took it over, which now allowed them militarily to advance and retreat as they wish against the genocidal Serb forces. When they took over that mountain in '94, that's when the Americans said, whoa, wait, this is a genocide and now we need you to sit down on the talk table. Only when they were winning. Power is the thing that dictates. And that's why I think that in this regard, and to finish on this point, Gaza exposed, or rather Gaza broke the US ability to mobilize international institutions in a way that used to lend it legitimacy for its empire building abroad. Now the US is struggling to do so in a way that I argue is now irreversible, because now when you have the EU coming out to defend its international institutions, and when you have international institutions now targeting the Israelis and potentially targeting the US for complicity, it's not about whether it will be implemented today. Rather, and here's where the social media accompanies this, if you have a new young generation under 35s that in the polls in the US now show that they are overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian, when the head of the ADL in the US comes out and says that we've lost a whole generation. He's talking, Israel has lost a whole generation. When we're now seeing this shift, if the ICC issues an arrest warrant today, some will say, what's the point? It won't be implemented. That's not what Israel is worried about. Israel is not worried it will be implemented today. Israel is worried the next generation will come into power and implement it because it wasn't implemented before. And Israel is not worried about the ICJ because the ICJ will implement its rulings today. Israel is worried that all of that power that they built in the US administration to influence international institutions in its favor, 30 years down the line, you will have someone so pro-Palestinian that they will implement those rulings. And this is the point to hit home here. Because Israel is not worried that it will be unable to move the international institutions today. Israel is worried that Gaza has broken the ability to monopolize them. And here's what I mean. In November, Israel is not worried about who comes into power. It believes that Biden or Trump are going to be good for Israel. Biden or Trump are going to lend the support for Zionism. So Israel is not panicking because somebody is going to come to the White House in November who will be anti-Israel. Israel is worried that the aura of invincibility has been emphatically broken by Gaza, which means the US will no longer be able to wield this rules-based order in a way that constantly defends the Israelis. John Hudson, the chief correspondent of the Washington Post, tweeted 2 weeks before this recording that new analysis is now capturing the difference between the people, the Zionists giving Biden money, the millions that he's getting, and they're giving it to him on the basis that he supports Netanyahu. Analysis capturing the difference between all of this money that's being given on the condition of supporting Israel and the 13% of 2020 Biden voters who are swearing they're going to punish Biden in November because of the genocide. What John Hudson said in the tweet, what he means is, this is the first time in American history where the Zionist lobby is requesting something, support for Zionism, is requesting something that will actually make a president lose in the election. So usually the mantra in America is Zionism equals victory, anti-Zionism equals defeat. This is the first time in American history, or as long as Israel has been lobbying America, that a candidate will take all this money from Zionists and still lose an election. This is what Israel is worried about. Israel is worried it would lose the aura of invincibility, because if Biden loses in November because he supported Zionism, when the Zionist donors go to him and go to the Democrats in 2 years' time in the congressional election or in 4 years' time for the election, they will say, we will give you this money and you have to defend the Israelis. The Democrats, what Israel is worried about is Democrats will say, Once upon a time, we couldn't say anything to you because we knew you could punish us.
Yeah.
But we supported you in 2024 and we still lost. We took your money and we still lost. Now we still want your money. But this idea of not recognizing a Palestinian state, we might have to recognize it. This idea of making a deal with Hamas, we might have to, Hamas for algorithm purposes, but we might have to go, this idea where we might actually have to force you to give Palestinian more rights, we might have to call for it. Why? Because we know you can't take us down, because when we supported you, we still lost the presidential election. This is what Israel is worried about, and this is what Gaza has done. Yeah. Iraq didn't do this. Afghanistan didn't do this. Bosnia didn't do this. Vietnam didn't do this. None of the other wars did this. The thing that Gaza did, which was unique, was not expose the rules-based order. That was already exposed before. What Gaza did is that it has now posed an existential threat to the apartheid regime, because Israel can only survive with the support of a colonial power, whether it's the British who helped it to defeat the Palestinians and drive them out of their lands, or America today, which lends the support. You remember when Iran hit those missiles, only 25% of the missiles were taken down by Israelis. It needed 75% from the French, from the Jordanians, from the Saudis, from the US in order to help to take down those missiles. The point that I'm saying here is this is what Gaza has managed to achieve. This is what Israel is worried about. Not the collapse of a rules-based order. It's the collapse of the ability of the US to monopolize the rules-based order in a way that used to allow it to achieve its interests at the expense of everybody else.
So this is really interesting. So your point here is that America's ability to use those levers it used to have to be able to manipulate the international system, that ability has waned and somewhat declined. And your argument is that is irreversible now, that America will find itself wanting in any future crisis, whether it's to do with Palestine or other crises around the world. Now, how true is that? How true is it that it's irreversible? Because we've seen, maybe not at this level, but we've seen the public, the world opinion actually against America after Vietnam, for example. And even during the, as you said, Afghan and Iraq wars, as those wars became quagmires, the international community began to turn its back on America. And America has this ability to resuscitate itself and its international system. And it can do that through its election cycles. It picked Obama, and Obama in a way gave tonally a different face to America. How confident are you that in the coming years, America isn't going to resuscitate its image and resuscitate those levers because of the switch of a president? And added to that, I mean, yes, the Zionists have banked on Biden and of course in the Democratic Party, but equally, the Republicans are as Zionists, if not more than the Democrats, if you can be more than the Democrats. And so, from their perspective, we've effectively captured the state. We've captured both the Democrats and the Republicans. And so moving forward, we have options. And so the resuscitation of America, but also the ability of the Zionists to resuscitate their levers in Washington.
Often when I have discussions with people, I resent talks in abstract. I'm not saying that's what you did, but I resent talks in abstract.
Yeah.
Because they tend to distract from the reality of what's staring you in the face.
Right.
Take America, for example. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution of America, they never envisaged that this Constitution would lead to civil rights for the African Americans in the US. It wasn't designed for that. It was designed to uphold an order in which slavery was still ongoing, in which those who were free from the black population were still inferior to the white population. If you told the Founding Fathers that in 1968 this constitution would be bent so out of shape that it would give civil rights to the African American population, I think the Founding Fathers would rewrite the constitution in a way to prevent that. The point I'm saying is they bent the system out of shape in terms of what it was designed to achieve. They made it achieve something it was not designed to achieve. When you look at Obama coming to power, ignore the fact what Obama did. The fact you had an African American president, even if he failed miserably, was not in the calculations of those who wrote the constitution as the Founding Fathers. They did not intend that. And I argue if you had said that to them when they were writing the constitution, they would have changed it because it was not designed to achieve that. If you had said for the Americans, and this is the point I want to make over here, when they entered Afghanistan, that 20 years later, they would decide to give up, negotiate with the Taliban, hand over Afghanistan, and leave without a plan in that disastrous way. The Americans would have told you, no, that's definitely not going to happen. I'm going to make sure that it doesn't happen. People talk about systems like they are impregnable and never changing. I argue systems are just like human beings. They change with the wind, they change with the weather, and they are, as we say in the Arabic saying, as weak as the spider's nest. They can tend to go. Why? Because they are built by humans, they alter based on human beings as well. When we talk about America being, can it resuscitate itself? In what way are we talking about it being resuscitating? America comes into the World War II and it intervenes. It's not the global superpower at the time. The British and the French are still the global superpowers. Even after 1945, you still have the British Empire, you still have the French Empire until 1960s. So we're talking literally 50, 60 years ago. We're not talking 100 years ago. The America emerges as a superpower probably in the 60s or in the 70s, but it's wrestling with another superpower called the Soviet Union. So there's no American hegemony insofar as it's ruling the world on its own. You have the Soviet Union, you have China, and you have the US. USSR breaks down in 1990. 1990 till today is how long? 30 years. US has only been a hegemon power for 30 years. And you are describing a system to me as if it's been there for 400, 500 years. This is what I mean about perspective. The Americans do not see their power as something that's been there for 400 years. They see themselves as a power only on the past 30 years when they defeated the USSR and expected to run the global system as is. But even after that, 2001, they go into Iraq and they fail miserably. The Iranians outmaneuver them in such an extent where the Americans can't even impose themselves on who they want in power in Iraq. They have to negotiate with the Iranians because the Iranians have about 23 or 32 militias, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, that they've made into the Hashd al-Shabi. And the Iranians bully the US in Iraq and forced Obama in 2015 to allow the Iranians to embed their militias in the Iraqi National Army, just so Obama, because he was tired of domestic opinion, so Obama could say to the Americans, we're winding down from Iraq, because he realized that for all of America trying to assert itself, American people are no longer inclined towards this empire building that the state was trying to establish. You see America resuscitating itself. I see America going into decline. You talk about they elected Donald Trump. Donald Trump turned around to the establishment and said to them, guys, why are we in Syria? Why are we in Afghanistan? But why did he ask those questions? Because Trump believed that's what the American people wanted. He said, my base is asking me, why are our boys dying abroad? I want to please them by bringing my troops home. You presented your question as if America is this power as one body moving abroad. I'm arguing America is stumbling and it's only really been a hegemon power for the last 30 years. It's been a competitor on the stage as a superpower for the last 60, 70 years. But it's only been a hegemon power for the last 30 years, if that, because even in those 30 years, we saw what happened in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Vietnam beforehand, it was kicked out. The American ambassador had to flee the embassy in his pajamas because the Viet Cong had entered Saigon. That's how America left Vietnam. And this is the point when I talk about perspective. Even when you talk about, okay, Sami, the other side, the Republicans are also pro-Zionist. Again, that's abstract. Look into the debate that's taking place amongst right-wingers. Candace Owens rebels against the Daily Wire, then goes on Piers Morgan show and says, you are scared of Israel, which is why you're not doing your job as a journalist. Candace Owens, Wama Adrak, Suhaib Webb said semi-jokingly, although I think he was seriously, one day inshallah she becomes Karima Owens. You never know at this rate. Tucker Carlson from the right-wingers, once an ardent Trump supporter, influential over the right wing, does an interview with Glenn Greenwald on the other side of the spectrum and also argues that the US should now stop funding the Israelis because, quote, in his words, the reason Israel does all the things that it does is because we give it the ability to do so. Israel needs to learn to operate within its means, and then it will realize that it cannot live without peace with the Palestinians. You have Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire or Matt Adrak. When the Zionists lobbied Congress to change the definition of anti-Semitism and they passed it, Matt Walsh came out, I don't know if they passed it, but Matt Walsh came out and said that this new bill of anti-Semitism will make the New Testament illegal in the United States. Who would have thought that the primary attack on the anti-Semitism bill would be Matt Walsh from the right-wingers, from these Republicans, who you just said in your question are hardcore pro-Zionists in terms of their support. Donald Trump's own supporters in his rally, Genocide Joe, Genocide Joe. You saw it, you saw the video, everyone did. They're chanting Genocide Joe. And he turns around and goes, then around. Like, he's turning around. Why? Because he's adapting to what his base are saying. Your question presupposes that these systems have been the same for the last 60 years. It hasn't been the same for the last 30 years. And this is what I argue, or my perspective on it, in that this is a system that is constantly being bent out of shape, contrary to what those who wrote this system were trying to achieve. And this is why I argue that if the black population, African Americans, can get the civil rights in 1968 in direct contravention to what the American Constitution was written to achieve, the words were designed to achieve something else, but it achieved, in the end of the day, rights for the African Americans. I argue to people that what it shows is, if you keep hitting at the system, if you keep punching that system, if you keep bending, imagine it's like you want to imagine like an impregnable system. You see, imagine it's an iron bar. It's being bent and bent and bent and bent and bent until it's no longer fit for the purpose that it was designed for, because of the pressure that Gaza put on it, that you put on it, that Iraq put on it, that Afghanistan put on it, that Vietnam put on it, that the protesters in the United States put on it, that US public opinion put on it, that the UK put on it. We may not be happy with the shape of it currently, but neither are those who made the system in the first place. And that's why I argue that the question is posed as to, Sami, how can we deliver the decisive blow? I'm saying that might not be for our generation, but given the generations before kept bending it, let's at least keep bending it until it either snaps and produces something different, or we mold it in a way that benefits justice and what is right. So that's the point with regards to Gaza. American public opinion is changing, and that's why I go back to this point. What are the Israelis worried about in November? They're not worried that leaders are going to come to power who are anti-Israel. They are worried that the aura of invincibility will be so smashed that the system will change in a way in which Zionism is no longer something to support, but rather a liability. And this is I'll finish on this point. When we look at Starmer here in the Labour Party, I actually don't believe that Starmer is so pro-Zionist on an ideological basis. I think Starmer looks at what happens to Corbyn. That Corbyn, when he came out and presented pro-Palestinian tendencies, you saw the Al Jazeera Labour files. We saw how the Israeli lobby went after Corbyn so hard, mobilized so hard, won sympathy from the media so hard, that Corbyn effectively collapsed despite the wave of grassroots support that he has. I think Starmer is saying, why am I going to do the same thing? If the mantra in the UK is Zionism equals victory, why am I going to be the idiot and do what Corbyn did and throw away a golden opportunity to come to power because of a minor issue like Zionism? Let me avoid that issue and focus on other things as well. And that's the whole concept of punish Labour. It's not punish Labour because Labour are not the better of the alternatives. It's punish Labour. Why? If Starmer believes that Zionism is what's going to get him into power, prove to him it's a liability by denying him the outright majority that objectively he should be getting because the Conservatives are so bad. But that's the point I want to say. I'm not saying that the system is good. I'm saying that the perception of the system as something that has been a constant is a wrong perception because it's been bent so out of shape. And the idea of America resuscitating itself, let's be brutally honest, could you have imagined just 10 years ago that US would be the only voice in the United Nations voting in favor of the Israelis? Could you have imagined 10 years ago that the US would find itself so diplomatically isolated that the EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell comes out and says, how can you talk about ceasefire while you're giving them weapons? Could you have imagined that in America now, Biden is behind Trump in the polls because of his position on Gaza? All of these things show that the system might be in place, but it is changing before your very eyes. And that's why I always encourage people. I'm not saying that we should be happy with the current state. I'm saying that if you identify it for what it is, you will be able to make the change that you want. But so long as you see something that isn't there, something that you think is there but isn't there, that's when you will end up floundering and preserve the system in the situation that it is. See it for what it is. It's crumbling.
I get that. So that, I think it's a very, you put it very well. You go to America and you observe the reality in America, as you said, on a granular level, and you mix with the Muslim community there and how they interact with the system. Is your message to them that the US system it's bending, it's changing, can that system mold into something which is better, something that bends towards justice? Or is really the message to the Muslim community and beyond, to the non-Muslims, that we really should be actively participating in a decline of this superpower, in a decline of this empire? Are you a reformist when it comes to America? Or do you think there needs to be a radical overhaul, a radical shift in the American empire concept?
I'll be honest with you. My day job is more as a geopolitical analyst and strategist. I deal with the battles of the day, not the battles that are to come.
Yes.
And in the midst of the battles of the day, we might prepare for the battles that are coming.
Yes.
And I do this on the basis that only Allah knows the outcome, not me. I don't know what Allah has planned. Did Allah plan for the people of Hud to be reformed, or did He plan to destroy them? He planned to destroy them. Yeah. But He planned for the people of Yunus alayhi salam to be reformed. Only Allah decides what the outcome is. Hud and Yunus alayhim as-salam did not have a choice in terms of what the outcome would be, whether it would be reformed or not. The choice they had was, to what extent will you stand up for justice, and what extent, what abilities or tools will you use to advance the cause of justice based on the battle of the day that you have over here. I'm not saying that the US system can be reformed or the like. What I'm saying is, the American system has been bent, not because the people wanted to bend it, but because people, they punched it demanding justice, and it ended up bending in this way. We don't know if it will continue bending into a new shape like the ones you see in IKEA, or whether it will snap completely and you will be forced to create a new system. I don't know that. My message here is simple. If it is bending, meaning it is now subverting the will of those who designed it, then it shows that it is worth struggling for justice. It's worth mobilizing for justice, because there are tangible things that are being gained. Because the way the rhetoric is now is, we've done all these things in the past and they achieve nothing. I'm pushing back on that. We have achieved something and the system has been bent. Your question is asking, Sami, is this what we should be striving for? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if your argument is that all of this movement brings nothing, I reject it categorically because it's been bent.
Yeah.
If your question is how far can it be bent, I don't know. Maybe it was designed in a way that it's going to snap, and maybe it's designed in a way that lends itself to reform. I don't know.
Yeah.
But my message to the Americans is this, that don't think about what it means long term. Think about the battle you have today. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he was fighting in Badr, he didn't know defeat in Uhud was coming next. He didn't know existential crisis in Khandaq was coming next. He didn't know the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was coming next. And after the treaty, he didn't know that Fatah Mecca was coming until the ayah which says, زُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولُ رَسُولَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. That the Prophet and the Sahaba were shaken until the Prophet and the Sahaba, they say, when is the victory of Allah coming? Which means even they got to a stage in their activism, in their mobilization, where they ask the same question that you've posed to me here. When is this victory coming? Because we've done all these things, but based on the gains that we've made, we still can't see what the outcome looks like. And this is why I've said the outcome belongs to Allah. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in this. When I go to America and I'm sitting with the Americans and they say, Sami, Trump or Biden, I'm saying, guys, that misses the point, because Trump or Biden are both going to be pro-Zionist. If you're looking for your interests, look at what the other side wants to achieve. Israel doesn't mind Trump coming to power, except in one instance. If Biden loses because of his mental capacity, because he's getting older and he's clearly struggling, and I don't wish that on any person and the like, you know, and we always wish good health for people and the like. If Biden loses because of this or because of the economy, Israelis will be happy. But if Biden loses because he was punished for his support for Gaza, that's disastrous for Israel, because it causes something that Trump cannot remedy later, which is invincibility of Israel. What I'm saying to the Muslims is that prize is worth compromising and suffering for. And some Muslims have responded to me and said, Sami, but those 4 years will be rough under Trump. I said to them, guys, first of all, you've already survived 4 years of Trump. They said, no, he will be worse this time. But when you think about it logically, they may only end up suffering for 2 years, because you have the congressional election in 2 years.
Right.
So if you punish Biden in November, Democrats will need you in the congressional, even if they dislike you for what you did in November when you punished Biden. So the come of the congressional elections, you and your African-American Christian allies and your, the Asian community that want to punish genocide and all these other factions of the American public opinion that have shifted and become pro-Palestinian, the Democrats will need them in 2 years to win the Congress in order to check Donald Trump. In 2 years' time, you put up with Trump coming after the Muslim organizations for 2 years. You're now ready in the congressional election to deliver the House to the Democrats to keep that check in place, in which you're now able to protect your interests with guys in America. I'm not saying you will have all your interests protected. What I'm saying is, look at it tactically and strategically on the basis that the system is being bent out of shape. If you believe the system is being bent out of shape, what it should say to you is, how can I bend it further? Right. Instead, people are asking, how can I snap it? Don't ask that. If you don't have the power to snap it, that doesn't mean you give up. Instead, you keep trying. Jalal, do you want to try and bend it further? You couldn't do it? Okay. Yeah, Sami, do you want to try bend it? Yeah, Mohib, do you want to try bend it further? Okay, should we try all three of us together to bend it? Gaza comes, big strong man. He says, I can bend it in a way that it can't be bent before. And Gaza goes, bends it in a way where Biden suddenly says, hang on a second. I lived my whole career supporting AIPAC. I knew my mantra in politics was support Israel, you win. Am I really about to lose in November? Because no, I can't believe it. I don't believe it's possible because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But when he gets shocked in November for losing Azot of Gaza, that's what I'm saying. It's not about reform where system can be changed. I'm arguing those kind of things, you can aspire to them, but ultimately Allah will decide the best course in terms of what's happening. And the proof is in the Quran. That's why I always argue Quran is a political book. Not every people get the same punishment for rejecting the message of their prophets. A lot of them get destroyed, but Yunus alayhi salam does what some Muslims are arguing, which abandon it. Leave the people. They're not worth it. There's no point. It's all rigged against you. There's no hope for them. Yunus alayhi salam leaves his people. What does Allah do? Allah uses tools aside from Yunus to guide the people, and that system is completely reformed in a way that Yunus alayhi salam comes back and says, Subhanaka ya Rabbi inni kuntu min Allahumma la ilaha anta subhanak inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Allahumma, I was of the wrongdoers. What did he do that was wrong? He abandoned his mission to continuously call for justice within a society that upheld injustice. His punishment was he left them and abandoned them because he said there's no point. That's what I mean by Quran being a political book. And this is the point I finish on over here. It's not that I'm saying that you will deliver a decisive blow or a body blow. That's not my job. When corporate clients, they come to me, they don't ask me, Sami, what's long term? They say, Sami, our ship is stuck on the Red Sea. We don't know, should we cross or go around Africa? Give us the lay of the land and then tell us the options that are available to us. That's my role. I'm not talking about reform. I'm saying these are the options that are available to you. And I don't know if they will bend the system out of shape or completely destroy it, but I know they will bend the system. The system's been bent to lend you opportunities. Seize those opportunities. Don't sit at home and do nothing.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. So I want to understand what you're saying to Muslims in America, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, here in a little bit more detail, because some would say, okay, what you're calling for is you're giving oxygen to a system that is already flailing, right? You've said it, right? This system is being bent out of shape. And it's not necessarily because of the Muslim community. It's because of the internal inadequacies and hypocrisies within the international system. So the system is being bent out of shape. It's failing. It's losing ground by encouraging Muslims to vote, which I do, which you do, encouraging Muslims to participate, encouraging Muslims to punish Starmer, to punish Biden. Are we not giving oxygen to a system that would otherwise collapse under its own strains?
The question is built on the premise that the system will collapse if you don't participate in it. I won't talk about it in abstract. Again, I'll push back on abstract and I'll talk about the US system itself.
Yes.
Well, let's start with the UK because we're in the UK at this moment in time and I am a British citizen and I'm a very proud British citizen, I'll be honest with you. What does Starmer fear the most on July the 4th? Starmer fears that the worst conservative government in history that's polled to get the worst results in the last 100 years, he's worried that even in that situation, he can't even get an outright majority. Why? Because there's a group of voters, Muslims and those non-Muslims who want to punish Azot of Gaza, who are campaigning day and night, not on the basis they believe they can beat Starmer. They've already surrendered that Starmer will probably get the largest party, but they are insistent that Starmer cannot get an outright majority, and they will force him to talk to those new independent members in order to get laws passed in Parliament. He will be forced to rely on them in order to win that full support within Parliament. Starmer is worried, not that he won't get a majority. He believes he'll get a majority. He's worried he won't get an outright majority because the impact of these voters will be so huge, they will ruin it for him. And not only that, he's worried that even if he wins the majority, they will say Starmer did well, but he could have done better, but he was punished by these voters, by the Galloways, by the independents, by Layhan Mohammed, by all these others, people around the country. Starmer is worried about this. And then somebody comes to me and says to me, what's the point? Starmer is worried because that threatens something in the system, in that it gives oxygen to the potential for a new revolutionary movement that can break the two-party system in the UK and even in the US itself. So the calculations of Starmer and of Biden in the US is that as long as these people don't engage with the system, I'm safe because I can control it. The only reason it's collapsing and flailing is because these people keep engaging with it, because they keep protesting, because they keep doing their activism, because they keep using the courts, because they keep using the media, because they keep training new leaders, because they keep training new media people, because they build their masajid, because they build their churches, because they go and train new, because of their engagement, we're in trouble. If they say to me there's no point and go home, alhamdulillah, let them go. You don't want to, but go. I don't want you to. Yes. Go and stay away so that the people participating, influencing the system, I can have control over them. And this is the point. The premise of the question says, if the system is falling, why participate? But go back one step. Why is the system failing? It's because we keep pushing and pushing. When the Muslims came in, they built the masajid, they lobbied for the rights of the masajid. They lobbied for the rights of the imams. They lobbied for the rights of Jum'ah. They lobbied for the rights of Eid. They lobbied for the rights. I don't underplay these things. Why? Because this was the start of the long trend. The reason Faraj and these guys are so worried is because when the Muslims started building these institutions, Sheikh Suhail Hanif, very beloved friend of mine, we went to Australia together. I love the way he describes it. He says fiqh is not a personal science. He says it's a public science. When Muslims go, fiqh is a blueprint to build a Medina anywhere in the world. So when Muslims go, what's the first thing they build? The masjid. Then they have the zakat at an institution to keep the money flowing. And they build everything around the masjid and they expand because that influence starts expanding. What Faraj is worried about is that British citizens are now resonating with the da'wah that is coming out, not just of Muslims, but also of non-Muslims, who are arguing for a revision of what it means to be a British citizen. And Faraj wants to go back in that only white people can be British citizens. But now you have a new generation of those in England and in Scotland and in Wales who see a very different identity, modern identity for what it means to be British. I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm saying look how that system is changing. Not because Faraj led that move or the English led that move, but rather because of the engagement and activism, it led to those changes taking place. So when it comes to the UK, analyze it. The first thing about political analysis is not just to analyze your interests, but what does the other side want as well? And this is the point. Somebody said to me, Sami, you know, you're advocating punishing Biden, but the Israelis want Trump to come to power. I'm like, because the point is not Trump. The Israelis are worried about something else. Even if the outcome is the same, the trajectory, it's like I had a tutor in university, Sham Qayyim, phenomenal brain, mashallah. He did his PhD on something on choice. I said to him, Sham, like, who does a PhD on something abstract, intent like choice? He says, I'll give you the crux of it. He said, if we gather 10 people in a room, and I've come in and I'm going to go with a decision. I've decided before I enter the room, this is the decision I'm going to make. Is there a difference between going into the room and telling the 10 people this is the decision and going into the room and asking the 10 people what they think and then sit for 3 hours and then guide a discussion to the decision? Is there a difference between the two? There's clearly a difference because one leads to an outcome that leads to potential rebellion. He came in and imposed himself. The other says, I might not agree, but at least he consulted. We had a discussion about it. The shura agreed on it and therefore we move forward on it. They produce two different outcomes. So Trump might be the same outcome, but with two very different consequences as a result of the shift in right-wing narrative and as a result of the shift in the invincibility of Zionism, which is why I argue that even after ceasefire, there is a big issue in that there will be a narrative war to argue that Biden will lose because of the economy. We have to keep pushing that Biden will lose because of Gaza. We don't want the Zionists to ruin that narrative either. But going back to your question, I promise this is, I'll show where it all links back to your question. They are arguing that, you know, by supporting the system, we are lending oxygen to it. But it suggests it's the participation that resuscitates the system. I argue it's the participation that is resulting in the collapse of the system. It is the participation, because, and ultimately, the best example is this. Why did they resist giving women the right to vote in 1920s? Because they knew the system would change in a way they weren't willing to entertain. Why were they so reluctant to give African Americans rights in 1968, civil rights? They said you can vote, but you can't have civil rights. Why did they hesitate? Because they knew if they give civil rights to the African American population, the system shifts in such a way that they can't have the same control over it in the way they did before. Meaning that the other side is saying, please don't engage, please don't participate, please don't get involved. Please stop talking. Please stop using social media. Please stop protesting. Please stop campaigning so we can have peace of mind to run you over. Because the more you engage, the more the system is bending out of shape in a way that it no longer produces the outcomes that we want to achieve. Again, and this is the point I want to emphasize. I am not saying the system as it is perfect. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is it's different from when it was created, and it's in a worse form in the eyes of those who made it. It's in a worse form than when it was created, because over the years, because people didn't give up and they kept moving, the system changed in such a way that it's unrecognizable from when it was established. And what Gaza shows is now it's moving in a trajectory where it might either collapse or reform in a way that makes it unrecognizable, because it gives rights to those that are just. And this is the point. Politics is a science of human relations. The way humans can wake up with one mood and go to sleep with another mood is the same as systems and states and organizations, because they're run by collective human beings and collective human emotions. And Muhammad Asad in his book Road to Mecca has a wonderful piece in the beginning where he says that one of the reasons why you find such antagonism from the West towards Islam is not because of anything objective. It's because the first time Europe ever became Europe as a collective body was the first crusade. It was the first thing that united them. So it's like a psychological memory in the back of their head, like Richard Dawkins when he says, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God and I hate religion. But if I had to choose, I choose Christianity. Because he has this socio-historical memory in the back of his head, something psychological. You know the way a child develops habits that even if they don't believe in the ideology anymore, they still do the habits because when they're kids, they were used to it. It's like this memory that's inherent over there. When the Muslim da'wah goes out and people start realizing that, hang on a second, it's not the same way my socio-historical memory has taught me. That's why we see Islam becoming the fastest growing religion. And not only that, and this is the point that I emphasize in America and in the UK. Muslims don't have power in terms of their ability to single-handedly move systems. Muslims have the ability granted to them by Allah because of the power of the da'wah and calling people to that which is right. The power of the Muslims is not in that their vote will actually result in the change, even though it will contribute. The power is their ability to consistently uphold justice and speak in the words of justice that resonate with the fitrah, the innate nature of justice in every single human being, which is why the da'wah of Gaza made LGBT, leftist, socialist, and all these other people go and take to the streets and go and do the encampments because their fitrah resonated with the da'wah. And this is the point I want to make to Muslims, in that the power, the criteria of power is often not in the way that we imagine it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala monopolizes all power, but there is power in da'wah. So in the UK and the US, what I'm saying to them is this, that go and talk to your societies. Go and talk to them, because what you'll find is the English is now resonating with what you're saying, and Rochdale is proof of it, because Muslims are not the majority in Rochdale, but they still voted Galloway based on the Gaza ticket. We are seeing now that in the UK and in the US, non-Muslims are resonating with that da'wah, with that voice, and don't underestimate that voice in its capacity to bring about change. And this goes back to the point of what change means. Muslims will not single-handedly bring the system down, but through their da'wah, they can convince society to change a system that was designed to oppress. They can influence society to change the system to one that lends itself to justice, either in its current form or whether it collapses and another system is created.
Sami, for a number of shows, we've talked about the inadequacies, let's say, of the Muslim rulers and their inability to deal with the Gaza crisis. We don't want to replay that, and for those viewers who haven't seen those shows, they can go back to the Muslim rulers one in particular. But there is an argument to say that the reason why these Muslim rulers remain in a comatose state is because even though American power is receding, American grip still remains pretty firm over the Muslim world. Now, as American power recedes, the argument then goes that we should be looking forward to a multipolar world with maybe competitive powers like China and Russia to a lesser degree rising. And by that, we can have a space opening up in the Muslim ummah and in the Muslim world where we're no longer, we have choices. There are options available to these rulers, and maybe the inability at this stage for them to maneuver will be removed because of the rise of this multipolarity. So I suppose my question is, multipolarity. Should we look forward to a multipolar world?
The question supposes there is no agency for Muslims within a unipolar world. And this goes back to the point I was saying that US has only really been a sole hegemon for 30 years, if that, and that's even at a stretch.
Yeah.
The reason why I say this is that if you look away from the abstract and at what happened over the past 60 years, there are numerous opportunities where Muslims had the chance to show agency, but failed to deploy it. Anwar al-Sadat entered Sinai Peninsula. He took Sinai back from the Israelis and could have marched onwards, but chose not to because he said, why would I exert Egyptian resources for Palestine? All I wanted was Sinai. And then when the Israelis thought, oh my goodness, this might lead to something greater, it was Sadat who unilaterally went to the Americans and said, I'm ready to talk. I just wanted Sinai back. That's a very simplified version of the history, but that's the reality of what ended up happening. When we look at King Faisal's oil embargo in 1973, there was a chance for the Muslim world. They showed they could shape the whole world and they could have capitalized it. They chose not to because of internal bickering between themselves, concerned that Saudi might be a power instead of Egypt, concerns over competition in Yemen, Iran on the other side, kind of where does the Shah lie and all of this that's happening and the like. Yeah. The point is agency always exists for the Ummah. We don't need a multipolar world to exert that particular agency. And even now with the US in decline, we're still seeing a lot of the Muslim nations, instead of deploying that agency, offering that agency to the US. For example, Blinken on his latest visit last week to the Middle East. We're recording this when? We're recording this in June.
19th of June.
19th of June. Blinken is gone to the Middle East. Blinken went to the Middle East. Why? The headlines suggest that the Arab states are angry with Blinken. That's not true. Blinken has gone to propose a plan for the day after, in which Blinken is saying this: Israelis can't stay in Gaza. And that's not like a concession from... He's saying Israel can't stay in Gaza for geopolitical reasons. There's a reason Ariel Sharon left in 2005. He didn't leave because he wanted to give land back to the Palestinians. Israelis don't give up even an inch of land unless they're forced to. Ariel Sharon left because he said, okay, I've got 2 million Gazans now in one area. Before you were just kicking out 100,000 and then the next area now has 200,000. And then you kick out 200,000, the next area now has 300. You can manage 300,000 people under apartheid. Managing 2 million under apartheid is difficult. It's not easy at all. And not only that, you put the settlers into such a concentrated area in a small strip of land, and that settler gets attacked by the Palestinians. You're forced to go in and start to attack Gaza. But the more you stay in, you've got nowhere to put the Palestinians. You either ethnically cleanse them and kick them to Egypt, or you massacre them and commit genocide. This is why there's so much pressure on Egypt, because Netanyahu believes, I can't stay in Gaza because I have the same problem as Ariel Sharon. These Palestinians will attack settlers. So it's preferable for me to keep it as a concentration camp or to kick them into Egypt. The reason Sisi doesn't want them in Egypt is not because he cares about the Palestinians. Sisi believes that the Palestinians go into Sinai Peninsula, they set up their camps, right? Palestinians are not going to give up on their land. So what ends up happening from those camps? Rockets start firing. The Israelis won't give a damn about Egypt. It doesn't matter how close an ally Sisi is. The moment a rocket comes from Sinai, what do you think the Israelis are going to do? They're going to invade Sinai with the help of the Americans and with the Europeans being quiet about what's happening. Sisi knows it's an existential threat to Egypt to allow Palestinians to cross over into Sinai Peninsula. Blinken has gone because there's another suggestion in which Blinken says, okay, if Israel can't stay there, we still need to demilitarize Gaza. Can you Arab states help us to protect Israel by demilitarizing it? Yeah. In January, and I mentioned in one of the other podcasts that we did together, but I didn't realize the full extent of it until recently when I mentioned it. The Jordanian foreign minister said that we reject an international peacekeeping force in Gaza and an Arab force. So we were confused and we said, why is he mentioning an Arab force? What Arab force would be willing to go in and treacherously chain the Palestinians into subservience to the Israeli occupiers? 3 weeks ago from this interview, or 4 weeks ago, Financial Times reported that Bahrain has suggested it may be willing to send troops to Gaza. Sisi, 2 months prior to that, had said that maybe we can propose a demilitarized Palestine in exchange for a recognition for a Palestinian state. And Biden himself came out and said that we're thinking about the idea of a demilitarized Palestine, so we'll give a Palestinian state, but one without an army and without weapons. Sisi said that before Biden said it, and it appears that somebody relayed that message to Biden to say the Arabs might be able to help you with a demilitarized Palestine. After the Financial Times reported that Bahrain said it's willing to do so, and we all know politically, and this is a mantra, when Bahrain speaks, it says what Saudi wants to say but cannot say. That's Bahrain. When UAE and Bahrain normalized, Saudi pushed Bahrain into normalization as a deposit for possible Saudi normalization later. Then there was a leak of the UAE foreign minister about 3 weeks ago, in which Abdullah bin Zayed reportedly told American officials that the Palestinian Authority are like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, suggesting that they talked about how to replace the Palestinian Authority into an authority that is more subservient than the current authority. I don't know how that can happen, but in any case. Then reports emerged last week that during Blinken's visit, an Israeli general met with the Saudi Army General, UAE Army General, and Bahraini Army General in Bahrain. And they could have only talked about military operations together with regards to Gaza. So we talk about agency here. Bin Salman could have come out and said, we're making a joint Arab coalition in defense of Gaza, and we are ready to sanction, or we're ready to kick out the US ambassadors, or all these other things aside from war. But he chooses not to. Because for Bin Salman, Palestine is a thorn in his side. Palestine gives life and spirit to an idea that he wants to crush in Saudi Arabia, which is this Islamization of political identities. Bin Zayed wants to smash, Israeli, the Islamization of political identities. So the idea here is, Bin Salman says, as long as the Palestinian cause is alive, it causes problems for me. Diplomats, there was George Malbruno, who is head of Middle East, I think for Figaro or Le Monde, two of the biggest papers in France. He tweeted and said that diplomats are coming back from Saudi Arabia, expressing surprise that the imams are now making dua again against the Israelis, meaning that they notice that the imams were not making dua for Palestine and against the Zionists, but it's being brought back into the Haramain. Why? Because Bin Salman is concerned that Gaza has now given life to something that he was crushing in Saudi Arabia through the bikini beaches in Jeddah, through the raves and the concerts and all these other things, and the new Vision 2030. The point I'm making here is go back to this. Your suggestion is multipolar world will create new opportunities for Muslims to assert agency. I'm arguing that multipolar world won't create new agency. It will only create different opportunities. Because Muslims always have agency to assert themselves, but they choose not to do so because the leaders have their own short-term interests in terms of what they're trying to achieve.
But will they have more agency with, say, a rise of China? China may be less authoritarian, if that's not a contradiction in terms when it comes to handling the Muslim world. China, we know, it doesn't concern itself with culture and with ideology in that sense, like the Americans do with their own freedom values and their cultural values. Would a rise of China be a net positive for Muslims in this multipolar world?
So let's look at Russia first, which is the antithesis to the United States.
Yeah.
Now, I agree that a multipolar world hinders the US ability to assert itself.
Yes.
There was a very good LBC interview. They interviewed an analyst, I think, from Rusi. And they said, why is it that we intervene directly to defend the Israelis, but we don't do it for Ukraine? And an analyst said, because Palestinians have no power to retaliate, but this is Russia we're talking about in Ukraine. And we know Russia can hit back just as much as we hit as well, which shows this is the reason why there's a lot of blame on Muslim leaders, in that it shows that the reason they're trampling over the Palestinians is because they know Muslim leaders won't go to their aid. Regardless, Russia, US had machinations in Syria. And Russia intervened against those US machinations. What did the Muslims gain in Syria when the multipolarity of the cause, did that create opportunities for the Muslims? Did that create agency for the Muslims? Did that create benefit for the Muslims? It created absolutely nothing. Libya, the US had machinations in Libya. It went in with NATO at the behest of Qatar, of course. It went in to Libya. Russia came in to stop the machinations of the US because it believed the machinations of the US were disastrous for the region. Give me an example of what Muslims gained from this multipolarity in Libya that the Russians managed to bring. And that's the point that I want to make here, in that multipolarity or unipolarity is not the point here. The point is agency and how you use that agency. Right. We have the agency, but we don't use that particular agency. And even in this issue of, voting with regards to November or the like, we have agency to punish Biden for Gaza, but we are hesitant, or not me, but a lot of the people that I met, they are hesitant to punish Biden for Gaza. Why? And here's the crux of the issue. And I put this when I was in San Francisco. I said, let's go through it. They are saying that if Biden loses, the situation will be worse for Muslims domestically. Let's talk about that in comparison to what happened to the Palestinians. Is a genocide going to be perpetrated in the next 4 years if Biden loses? No. Is Ben Shapiro going to knock on your house and say, this house now belongs to me, get out, and he takes that nice 3-bedroom house? No. Is a genocide going to be displacement of Muslims, not genocide, is a displacement ethnic cleansing going to take place in California of Muslims to drive them to the colder East Coast in Boston and New York and these places? No. So relative to the Palestinians, that's not the worst case scenario. So what's the worst case scenario that makes you consider that genocide of 100,000 Palestinians is worth forgiving? What is the worst case scenario? And the more you go to it, the more you realize the question is not Trump versus Biden. The question is, give me a comfortable way to punish genocide. I don't want to struggle for it because I struggle to make my career, my money, my houses and the like. And you're asking me to jeopardize that for the sake of my ummah and my Muslim brothers abroad. And I don't want to jeopardize that. The hikmah is to find a comfortable way to do it. And it is jahl if you tell me I have to struggle to do it. In other words, completely subverting, you know, what the whole concept of Islam is about. It's like that sheikh from New Jersey who said to me, you know, Islam is problematic for the Muslim at all times. I said, what do you mean Islam is problematic? He said, Islam is problematic even for the Muslim. What do you mean Islam is problematic? He said, think about it. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his relationship with Quraysh in the first 40 years, how is it? It's good. He's Sadiq, he's Ameen, they love him, they leave their amana with him, they let him take the caravans, everything. They love Muhammad Abdullah. They know his personality. He says, okay, when do his struggles begin? Does his personality change? No, they all know he's still Sadiq Ameen, that he's still trustworthy and he's still a man of truth. What changes is he stands up and demands the community to uphold justice and demands the community change its way to uphold, demands that genocide in Gaza doesn't happen. That's when his struggles begin. When do his struggles end, Ya Jalal? They don't end until his dying breath. Meaning that the essence of justice is a path of struggle. So the question of Trump versus Biden is not whether Trump or Biden. I actually think Trump might even win regardless because he was already ahead of the polls against Biden before Gaza happened. But the point I'm saying is that the question being posed is not Trump versus Biden. The question being posed is, do we need to struggle for this in terms of moving forward? And that's the hardest part. And this is the point I finish on. This is the hardest part of agency. The Americans were ready to work, to build their factories, to deploy their forces. They were ready to sacrifice for an empire. The British were ready to sail the seas, and I'm not praising them. I'm saying they were ready to go out of their comfort zones in order to achieve an empire for the wrong reasons. The problem of agency is not unipolar or multipolar. The problem of agency is it requires a struggle to unleash that Muslims are disinclined to do so and disinclined to, and even in the UK, when we say punish Labour because he supported genocide, and a lot of Muslims are like, no, but I have vested interest in Labour that I'm not willing to compromise. What vested interest in comparison to the, and you realize it is this essence of wahan, a love of comfort, and then and a resentment to anything that involves struggle. And that's the issue. Multipolar won't change. It will change the form of opportunity, because opportunity exists now. Change the form. But we still have to address the issue of agency and the capacity to deploy that agency and capacity for struggle.
So, Sami, one country that does seem to apply or use and utilizes agency is Iran. And we saw that in Iraq, as you quite rightly described earlier on. And we also saw that in Afghanistan in the American invasion, and how Iran participated in that and in some ways colluded with the Americans actually in that invasion. Iran in April did attack Israel, and as you said, that attack was thwarted, but it gave a very clear signal to Israel that Iran is ready to attack you on your soil. And it seems to have had an impact because the Israelis did not respond in kind. The Israelis recognized the symbolism of what Iran had done. You and I know that after each and every show, we get hundreds and hundreds of comments from people who are pro-Iranian. Can you at least accept, in inverted commas, and I'm speaking on their behalf here, reluctantly, but accept that at least Iran has used its autonomy far better than the shameless Arab rulers that you always talk about?
I have always accepted this. And one of the reasons that when people Google Sami Hamdi, they say, is Sami Hamdi Shia? Is because I am on record acknowledging that Iran has used this autonomy for its interest and to expand on its ideology and that Iran has resisted the US and resisted Europe, and it has gone head to head with the US in terms of wrestling with it in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, and that Iran has come out on top. Iran comes out on top because it convinces its allies of the legitimacy of its cause. It goes to the Shia populations in Iraq and in Syria and says, I am your protector and I am ready to stand by you through thick and thin. So when Hezbollah come under pressure, Iran is not like Saudi. Iran doesn't abandon its allies. When Iran goes and gives support to Hamas, Iran doesn't abandon Hamas. It gives them weapons in order to keep going. There are limits to what Iran does. Iran's message to the Israelis is simple. Genocide, okay, but just don't come after me directly. Hezbollah attacking from Lebanon, we're willing to cause you a headache and the like, but we don't want an all-out war and don't want to go in. Iran says, I don't have the power to do so. And also, I'm not ready that if I go in and liberate Palestine, it will be Shia. There's no point liberating Al-Aqsa if it doesn't become Shia. That's the whole ideology in terms of what they're trying to push. I'm not going into the details of whether that's good or bad. What I'm saying is, Iran has an ideology and it's pushing it forward. But I'm wary of exaggerating what Iran has managed to achieve. Iran showed that Israel without the US cannot last. Is that something you needed Iran to show you, or is that something that was already abundantly clear in the last 60 years?
Yeah.
Hezbollah have sent missiles and they hit the Israelis in northern Israel. Did that stop the genocide? It didn't. Did Hezbollah at least do something? Yes, that deserves credit. That's all well and good. Houthis fired missiles, part of this axis of resistance that they call it. I'm not sure resistance against what. They say resistance against Israel, but when I look elsewhere, I'm not sure if it's just Israel that they are resisting against. Houthis fired missiles, and that's all well and good. And that humiliates the Sunni Arab Muslim leaders, or Sunni Turkish Muslim leaders as well, who should be doing much more and who should be exerting that autonomy. Iran deserves recognition. I'm not saying praise, recognition in terms of its ability to use its influence in a way that has frustrated the Israelis. Because one of the things that has frustrated the Israelis is a lot of the Israeli people who've been taught they were invincible are saying, why can't we hit Hezbollah? Why can't, what do you mean the Americans don't want us to go? Like, why are they so scared of the Iranians in terms of what we're doing with the Iranians or the like? My contention is not that Iran is doing nothing for Palestine. On the contrary, everybody can acknowledge that Iran has been an ardent supporter of Hamas and these others and a supporter of Palestine and their ability to resist the Israelis.
Yeah.
My question is, does that eclipse what Iran did in Iraq when it displaced the Sunni populations in Diyala and in Mosul and these other places? Does that eclipse what Iran did in Syria when it rescued Bashar al-Assad and the regime there, and then went and drove out Sunni populations from their homes in southern Syria, and then ethnically altered the demographic of Damascus, and now is pushing in order to wipe out those who fled towards Idlib? Does displacement in Syria and Iraq and support for the overthrow of the international recognized government in Sana'a in Yemen, do we forgive all of that because of what they did in Palestine? What is preferable? And this is the question I can't answer. Which is preferable? That Iran does nothing for Palestine but gets out of Syria and Iraq and stops killing those populations over there through its militias, or to support Palestine and tell the Syrians, I know they're killing you, and tell the Iraqis, I know they're massacring you, and tell the Yemenis, I know they overthrew you, but you should tolerate that. You should accept being displaced. You should accept being slaughtered because Hezbollah is firing missiles from the south of Lebanon into Israel. That's what I can't reconcile inside my heart.
Right.
It's not that I think that Iran is doing a good job. I recognize what Iran has done for Palestine, but I think the lesson from that is how bad everybody else has been with regards to Palestine. Because while I believe in a region where we can live side by side with the Iranians, I believe the Iranians do not envisage a region where they can live side by side with the Sunni population. They see only subjugation of the region. And the proof is that even when you look at Iraq, after the Americans went in, the Shia parties had the chance to show Iraq what Shia rule looks like. Nouri al-Maliki formed the government. After him, Muqtada Sadr went and joined his government in 2006 after going to a war. Sadr joined his government. Then Haider al-Abadi came. They had the government in their hands for more than a decade, and all we saw was sectarian killings. I'm not saying bin Salman is better. I'm not saying Saddam is better. I'm not saying that Gaddafi is better. I'm not saying Mubarak is better. I'm not using that to praise the Muslim. I'm saying they're bad as well. I'm saying the argument that Iran is good because it helped Palestine is a flawed argument because of what Iran is doing elsewhere. And that's why I know many people got upset. The question that was posed to me in that Middle East Eye podcast was, what do we make of what Iran is doing in terms of sending its missiles? Iran sent a missile to send a message to the Israelis, which was as is. If you're committing genocide in Gaza, we've shown you the limits of what we're willing to do, which is to support with some weapons here and there and let Israel fire some missiles. But that's the maximum we are willing to do. We won't go to war against you for it. And we're ready to liaise with you in terms of our response. But don't you dare kill an Iranian in Damascus. Don't you dare kill an Iranian consul in Damascus. Don't you dare hit our embassy in Damascus. Don't you dare make us look bad. It's bad enough we let you commit a genocide, but this is our red line. So genocide was not the red line here. Some people say Iran doesn't have the power to do what you want to do. I agree. I agree Iran is probably doing what it thinks is the max that it's supposed to do. But my contention is not this. My contention is the vision Iran has of the region, you can see it in Syria. The vision Iran has of the region, you can see it in Iraq. The vision Iran has in the region, you can see it in Yemen. The vision Iran has of the region, you can see it in Lebanon. Am I going to wait for the Iranians to go and repeat the same thing in Palestine afterwards? And I know that I saw one Palestinian write to me and say, but Sami, you need to acknowledge the resistance and their support for the resistance. My approach is different. My approach is to humiliate or embarrass the other leaders who are supposed to do something, like the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, and not humiliate them because I don't like them, but rather to say to them, look how they are still talking about normalization, even while a genocide is taking place. Because I believe that if Erdogan was to move, and bin Salman was to move, and bin Zayed was to move, some people don't like I put the three in the same bracket. In Gaza, I put them in the same bracket. That if Egypt was to move and they were able to move, I think Iranians would be rendered irrelevant. And the project they're trying to achieve would be exposed.
If these countries moved, could they have stopped this genocide?
I think 100%. My issue with Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt is that they had the power to stop the genocide. Think about it this way. When Biden comes to power in January 2021, he calls bin Salman a pariah. Bin Salman ends up playing with the gas prices to such an extent, he forces Biden to come to him the following year in July and fist bump him and tell him, please, please, yeah, bin Salman, please give me the conditions for a reset. I'm ready to reset relations. When the Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia came out and said that the human rights record in Saudi Arabia is a bad human rights record, they kicked out the Canadian ambassador and suspended contracts with Canada. When you offend bin Salman personally, then bin Salman moves and brings Xi Jinping to Riyadh and gives him red carpet treatment in order to slight the United States. When you offend him personally, he moves. When you offend him personally, he uses his power. When you offend him personally, he leverages the agency that he has. But when it's Gaza, he doesn't move. The United Arab Emirates, when it's upset with the US, it goes and signs technology deals with China. It goes and it supports, anti-US interests in other countries. It threatens US relations and US ties to such an extent that when the president of the UAE died recently, before Mohammed bin Zayed became president, Biden, as an apology, sends Lloyd Austin, defense minister, sends Blinken, secretary of state, sends Kamala Harris, vice president, sends Chris Murphy, one of the major Democrats in the parliament, sends Gina Haspel, the head of the CIA, to say to him, I'm sorry. He sends a high-level delegation to the UAE, wa ma adrak, to say to them, I'm sorry. So UAE knows how to leverage its power in favor of bullying the US into listening to what the UAE wants to do. But it chooses not to do so for Gaza. So the point of giving these examples is, it has power to do so, but it chooses not to do so. Erdogan, when he's upset about Syria, threatens unilateral action. He threatens to go in and cross the border. Trump scrambles and he sends Mike Pence and he sends, William Burns is the CIA general who went to UAE. Gina Haspel was Trump's CIA director. He sends Gina Haspel to Ankara, to go and say to Erdogan, please wait a minute. What concessions do you want so that you don't go into Syria or like? So they have power to do something. They choose not to do something for Gaza because they have short-term interests that they're trying to achieve. This is my issue, in that they could have stopped the genocide, not by going to war. If bin Salman has said normalization of ties is finished, done for, Not say we might in the middle of a genocide, we might normalize it. You don't say that to somebody slaughtering your brother, that we might enter a joint venture capital, joint capital venture or venture capital, whatever it is. If Bin Salman said normalization is finished and UAE had kicked out the Israeli ambassador and Saudi had ordered Bahrain, because Bahrain is the proxy, to reverse normalization as well, and Morocco had reversed normalization, said Western Sahara, to be honest, is not worth a genocide happening to the Palestinians, I think that the US would have scrambled quickly and said, because they can't sanction everyone in the region. If Turkey done it by itself, maybe they sanction Turkey. But they can't sanction everybody. I think the US would have come and said, Israel, stop, 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 stop. You're about to ruin everything. But they didn't. They did the opposite. They told the US that genocide is not a red line. People are saying, you know, Sami, they're making dua for Palestine again in the Haramain. In the same week they made dua for Palestine, on Saudi television, Al Arabiya, you have a commentator coming out saying that the Arab states need to intervene, not to stop the genocide, but to teach the Palestinians how to make peace with the Israelis. They need to go in because the Palestinians are the ones who caused all of this mess. So one language to the Muslims to keep them quiet so they don't cause a headache, and one language sent to the Israelis to say, we're on your side, like genocide is not a red line. And we know in Saudi Arabia that if you say something the government doesn't like Sheikh Salman al-Ouda, when he tweeted and said, you know, may Allah reconcile between two brothers, Qatar and Saudi, he even mentioned Qatar. He goes straight to prison. He hasn't come out since. So we know that if you say it on national television, it means the government approves of this view. Once upon a time, if you said it, you would have gone to prison for supporting Zionism. Now it's no longer the case. So Bin Salman is telling the Americans and the Zionists, and so are the UAE, that genocide is not a red line. Blinken goes to Saudi to ask about this Arab force that might be deployed in Gaza to restrict the Palestinians. An Israeli general meets with Arab armies commanders in Bahrain to talk about strategy for how to deal with Gaza and for Palestine. At least you could have cut ties, but you didn't. You reassured the Americans and the Israelis that, and that's where Iran deserves credit. What Iran said was, I'm not going to make this easy for the Israelis. I don't have the power to liberate Palestine, but I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm going to throw those missiles. I'm going to get Hezbollah to throw the missiles. I'm going to get Houthis to throw the missiles. And for this 100%, Iran deserves credit. And I think Iran did humiliate the Israelis in showing the limitations of their defense capabilities, because the Israelis needed the Americans, French, Saudis, Jordanians in order to help them to, you know, intercept those Iranian missiles. So that's all well and good. My contention is not here. My contention is the message was genocide, okay, just don't hurt the Iranian generals.
Throughout today's discussion, you pushed back against some of my more abstract questions. And you made a very interesting point about how we need to think about the details. We have to go to the granular level. That requires time, Sami. It requires pursuing the news on a very daily basis. You're a busy guy, Sami. You travel around the world. You give conferences, you give speeches, you write papers for your corporate clients. How much time do we need to put aside on a daily basis to pursue world events?
I think it's less about what do you do to follow the world events, and more about where you see your role in terms of trying to achieve justice. Not everybody is a speaker on a microphone. Not everybody is an analyst. Not everybody. You'll meet people who, it doesn't matter how much you try to teach politics, they don't get it. And they're not supposed to get it either. Allah didn't create human beings for everybody to do the same thing. And this is why a lot of what I've said is less about the details itself and more about perspective. So when you say to me the system is rigged, I'm telling you the details show they're not rigged. So it's not about I want you to know the details, it's more I want you to change your perspective on the system. That if it's being bent out of shape, don't tell me the system's not changing, because it clearly is. And that should inspire you within your own domain as to how you can continue to bend this system. For finances, they decided to come up with Islamic finance and decided to try to make it become mainstream. Some people will criticize the approach, but I always say, subhanAllah, you didn't criticize your money in the riba banks, but you're criticizing the ones trying to move us away from riba banks. So you see the perspective is flawed. Instead of trying to encourage the debate, you sort of try to put people off that particular debate, which is why I'm not too bothered. I'm happy if they're making mistakes along the way. The point that I'm saying is that it's more about perspective than it is about details. And often you don't need to follow the granular detail as long as you follow the trends in terms of what's happening. And one of the things that the Israelis are really worried about, they're worried about people reading. What the Israelis are worried about is they created this narrative that they are the victims and the Palestinians are the oppressors. But as a result of Gaza and social media, people are now reading. And when they're reading, they're starting to realize that, hang on a second, you know, the Palestinians are not the bad guys here. It's like there is a story by a sheikh from New Jersey. He told me, I may have told it last time, but I like this story. There's no harm in repeating it again. He was telling me about his time studying in Egypt, in Al-Azhar.
And he said while he was there, he'd noticed all the taxis, the meters, they don't work on the taxis. So he asked a taxi driver, he said, why is it when I enter a taxi, you know, the meters never work? So the taxi driver looks at him and says, it's bothering you, huh? He said, yeah, it's bothering me. He said, how do you feel? He said, I feel discomfort. I want to know how much I'm going to pay. He goes, see, right now on this journey, because the meter's broken, I feel discomfort and you feel discomfort. أنا مش مرتاح وأنت مش مرتاح. We're both feeling uncomfortable. So for this whole journey, all we're going to think about is how much, you know, this taxi driver is going to be worth. You're going to be thinking, how much am I going to pay? I'm going to think, if you're going to pay what I'm going to ask you to pay. So he says, okay, what's your point? He says, now imagine the meter was working. If the meter was working, you'd be comfortable, I'd be comfortable. You'd be comfortable because you know how much you're paying. And I'd be comfortable because I know how much I'm getting. So as a result, we won't feel the discomfort. And because we're comfortable, we won't be looking at that broken meter. We'll start looking outside. Now, as we start looking outside, we'll start seeing and analyzing what's happening, and we'll see all the things that are wrong. Once we see things that are wrong, we'll start talking, and we'll start talking about what's wrong. As we talk about what's wrong, we'll start asking, why is it wrong? And as we ask about why is it wrong, we'll say, what do we need to do to fix it? And as we say what we need to do to fix it, we'll start thinking, revolution. You see, my friend, this is why the taxi meters have to be broken. So the point that I'm saying is, what the Zionists wanted was for us to focus on the broken taxi meter. Don't read about the issue. Don't engage in it. Don't participate. Don't learn. Don't go and study about the issue. Just listen to what I have to say. Hear my price for the taxi and just pay my price because you have no other options available to you. But now that Americans are reading about what's happening, we're seeing non-Muslim Americans become pro-Palestinian. We're seeing Macron call for a ceasefire. We're seeing the Belgians call for sanctions. We're seeing Spain recognize a Palestinian state. All in contravention to what the Israelis are looking for. It's contrary to what the Israelis want. The reason they're doing so is because they are reading. And people are also learning about this whole anti-Semitism debate. People are opening the books and they're realizing, hang on a second, it wasn't the Muslims who kicked out Jews from Jerusalem. It was Romans. Muslims are the ones who brought them back. It was Umar ibn al-Khattab. Hang on a second. It wasn't Muslims who kicked out the Jews again from Jerusalem. It was Crusaders. Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi is the one who brought the Jews back. Hang on a second. It wasn't the Muslims who kicked out the Jews from Andalusia. It was Isabella of Spain. It was a European. And it was the Muslims who sent boats to bring them back. Hang on a second. After the Holocaust, I'm reading about it. What's this picture? Oh, they went to a Muslim land and it says, please don't do to us what the Europeans did to us. Oh my God. I grew up being taught that these Muslims are anti-Semites. It's clear that they're not. They are reading and they are learning and they are hearing, and that public opinion is shifting. And the reason why I am saddened by the fact that this realization is dawning on Muslims now is because it shows you that when we read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we read it like a Dajjal with one eye. And here's what I mean. Often when we read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we tend to start the story from Badr. We rush over the first 13 years. Yeah, there was a bit of da'wah and they were persecuted, and then we got to Badr. You know, we won in Badr, and then, you know, we had Medina and what life was like in Medina and the stuff. But if you think about it, he spent 13 years in Mecca and only 10 years in Medina. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the longer period in Mecca and make the shorter period in Medina? What was special about Mecca that was required and that we need to understand that led to Medina afterwards? So I started, you know, let's look at the seerah again.
Yeah.
And you realize that the reason Muslims skip over it is because they see that the first 13 years of the life of Rasulullah was one of weakness and not strength. And we don't like talk about weakness because it makes us feel insecure with regards to the weakness of our own state today. Even if I don't believe we're entirely weak. But in any case, when you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you start asking yourself questions. When you open the other eye, you start asking yourself some questions. Now, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't have an army, doesn't have wealth, doesn't have media. So why are the Quraysh, with so much material superiority, so frightened about the Prophet ﷺ? Now, there was somebody in America while I was giving the talk, we sat afterwards and he was asking me, you know, what can I do? He asked this question. And I said, read. And he said to me, listen, I'll be honest with you, Sami, like, I don't read books that are longer than 20 pages. So I was like, khalas, we'll do movie references. The film, The Message by Mustafa Aqad, about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Talib is lying on his deathbed. And Abu Talib says to the leaders of Quraysh, all Muhammad wants from you is one word. And Abu Sufyan says something remarkable. He says, if all Muhammad wanted was a word, we would have given him 100 words. The problem is the word that he wants. The word ceasefire is huge. The word genocide is huge. The word, you know, this word is making, you know, Kamala Harris is defending Zionism, but her daughter's raising money for Palestine. The word is making Mus'ab ibn Umair leave the elite of Quraysh to join the weak and persecuted Muslims. Weak and persecuted Muslims. It's making Umar ibn Khattab abandon our ways and join the weak and persecuted Muslims. He doesn't join them in strength, he joins them in weakness.
The point is, they were saying that the word of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was greater than any material superiority they had, because he was bringing about a change and impact that their material superiority could not stem or stop. And when you think about it, you go through the seerah, the Prophet ﷺ makes a dua in front of his Sahaba and says, Allahumma reinforce Islam with one of the two Umars. Allahumma izz al-Islam bi ahad al-Umarain. Now, who are the two Umars? Umar ibn Khattab and Umar ibn Hisham, Abu Jahl. Now, these two Umars, they're not neutrals in the cause at the moment. They are beating up Muslims and they are threatening to eradicate Islam. It's almost like me saying today, Allahumma reinforce Islam with Donald Trump. Some Muslims, when I was there, they started laughing. And I said to them, but think about it. When I first laughed at the suggestion, I went home and I wept. Why? Because I feared I would have laughed at the Prophet ﷺ had he made that dua in front of me. Because what are you laughing at? You're laughing at the ridiculous idea that somebody so antagonistic to Islam can become Muslim and suddenly support Islam. Why has it become so ridiculous in the back of your head? It's because the seerah for you ended in 632 AD. It doesn't apply to modern day. When we look at Khalid ibn Walid, we love telling the story. Khalid ibn Walid, became Muslim, became sword of Allah and the like, even though before, he used to drink alcohol and defeated the Muslims in Uhud. But if I told you today, is there a Khalid ibn Walid on the other side right now that with the da'wah, they can become Muslim again? You'll think, what, Khalid ibn Walid on the other side right now? And you realize in that mocking way, you realize that in your mind, what you're saying is Sirah doesn't apply today, it only applies in 632 AD. You've lost. But the point is that, this is what Abu Sufyan meant. Somebody said to me, but Sami, these are, at the end of the day, he still had to leave Medina. And all of this change of public opinion, we get it, you're trying to twist the seerah for public opinion. I said, okay, let's look at another thing he did. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gives da'wah in such a way that when his voice is so powerful, that when Umayyah, one of the leaders of Quraysh, brings Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu anhu in front of him and makes him kneel and says, what does Muhammad teach you? He says, Muhammad teaches us that all mankind is created equal. So Umayyah mocks him and says, equal? Is Bilal, my black slave, equal to me? Ammar says, yes. So Umayyah laughs in front of the other leaders of Quraysh. This is in the movie as well, you can watch it. It's based on the actual book that people don't want to read. He says to Bilal, take the whip and whip Ammar ibn Yasir so you can show him where the power lies. Show him who has the power. Bilal stands there refusing to hit Ammar ibn Yasir until Ammar says to him, hit me Bilal, hit me. You don't know what they're going to do to you. You don't know what the system's going to do to you. You don't know how they're going to punish you. You don't know how they're going to hit you. You don't know how they're going to use violence against you. Yeah, Bilal, hit me, hit me. Bilal throws the whip on the floor. In the movie, they all get up and says, what's this rebellion? Now, people, when they watch the movie or read about Bilal ibn Rabah, they have a sense of pity, which is misplaced. Bilal doesn't deserve pity here. Because pity implies that he's powerless against Umayyah, but they don't realize the reason Umayyah is hitting him is because there's a power that he's trying to extinguish in Bilal, that he's worried if the other slaves see, they will also embody that power and cause a revolution and upend Quraysh, upend society and change it permanently. The reason Umayyah hits Bilal is not because Bilal disobeyed him, it's because he's terrified that because Bilal defied the material power on the basis of the word of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, if other people follow Bilal's way, then no material superiority will be able to rescue them from the irresistible force of the revolution of the slaves, like Nate Turner later on in America when he did the slave revolt that ultimately led to the liberation of slaves in America, because the Americans, they brought it, no matter how much they tried to say that it was willingly given to the black population, it was African Americans who fought for it. They were worried that the spirit of Bilal would go into all of the other slaves. Bilal was the powerful one, not Umayyah. The third example, somebody said to me, Sami, all well and good, the slave, all well and good, the population and the like. When the message goes to the Prophet ﷺ that give your da'wah in public, and they all go out, they lock arms. There was a sheikh who said protest is not from the sunnah, but clearly there's a contradiction here. They lock arms and they go, there is no God but God and Muhammad is the messenger of God. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasul. And they go to the Kaaba. Quraysh, they start stoning the Muslims. They start hitting them. But what's happening here? They go to Kaaba, they cause a commotion, and now most of Quraysh have gathered to see what's the commotion. In the midst of the commotion, they are beating up the Muslims. They are beating up the Muslims. But then someone shouts, says, Hamza, Hamza is here. Hamza comes riding from the desert. Hamza, what he says what Macron, he says what the American non-Muslims are saying. I don't get it. All of this force against people with no weapons. All of these bombs and missiles against these people. And for what? All because they said that they want their land back. I am of the religion of Muhammad. I'm strong. Come and do to me. I dare you do to me what you did to these people. And then he hits Abu Jahl in front of everybody, and Quraysh, they scatter. Then Hamza says, I am for the religion. Later on, he says, I didn't realize what I was saying at the time. I only said it, just to show support because I couldn't believe, they're being hit. Later on, he accepted Islam willingly. But the point is, the shift in public opinion, where the sheer brutality of it ended up forcing Hamza, who Hind said he gets drunk in the desert, hunts in the desert, does nothing of value. Now Hamza enters Islam. What on earth is going on over here? The point is that the word of the Prophet ﷺ is now shifting Quraysh in such a way that their material superiority can't stop it. But yes, Sami, these are all personal things. Now we get to the big things. 2 more examples and I promise I'm done with the days. He sends the Muslims to Abyssinia, to Najashi, to Europe, to Britain, to UK and the like. And he says to them that these are people who are struggling with the persecution. So he sends them to Abyssinia so they might have some, ease and the like. Najashi is the NATO ally of Quraysh. He's their diplomatic partner, economic free trade partner. He's the guy who comes to their support whenever they need it. When Ja'far ibn Talib initially presents his case, Najashi says, you made a poor case. I'm sending you back because these guys are my friends. I'm going to send back the refugees. I'm not interested in your case. Ja'far says, at least hear me out. At least hear what I have to say. Hear my argument. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib's argument is so compelling. Najashi discards his NATO agreement with Quraysh and says to them, not for a mountain of gold will I hand them over to you. When Amr ibn As goes back after trying to bring the Muslims back, he's sent by Quraysh. He goes to Quraysh, the Quraysh leaders say he's affecting our foreign policy and he doesn't have an army, he doesn't have wealth, he doesn't have media. He's affecting our foreign policy even though we have the material superiority. And the final example is one that my dad rebuked me for not finishing. By the end of those 13 years, because the Muslims are saying, what's the point? We don't see how the change is being made. The same way Sahaba were beating up, many of them probably said the same thing. Okay, Candace Owens is leaving the Daily Wire, so what? Tucker Carlson is saying stop funding for Israel, so what? Matt Walsh is going against the anti-Semitism bill, so what? Donald Trump supporters are saying genocide, Joe, so what? American population want to punish Biden for supporting genocide, so what? What does all have? The system, the system, the system, the system. After 13 years, something happens. Aus and Khazraj, they arrive from another city called Yathrib and they say to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, because of your word, your message. Remember, he doesn't have an economic benefit to give them, doesn't have an army to threaten them, and doesn't have a media to go and spread. He's just been sending du'at. He's been sending Mus'ab ibn Umair and these others. But they still have mainstream media, the shu'ara, the poets and the like. They come to Aus and Khazraj and they say to him, Ya Rasulullah, because of your message, because we heard your call, because we heard what you said, because we watched your videos on TikTok, because we watched your stuff on Twitter, because we read your articles, because we went into your protest and we heard the message that you were preaching, because we heard all of this. We love your message so much. We want to tell you, how can we support you? We are ready to give you our city and everything. Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, when you read in Sirat ibn Hisham, when you read, he stands up and he says, he's so shocked. He thinks, why are these two tribes coming to lend their support? Do they not realize the path they're about to embark on if they stand up for Salah, if they stand up for justice, if they stand up for the Prophet ﷺ? Do they not understand that before them is going to be such immense struggle? They probably don't know, they don't understand. So Abbas stands up and says, wait, before you give this pledge, you need to know what's in it. Because let's be honest, if you're not up for the challenge, we've been with him 13 years, we'll continue struggling with him. But you need to know, in this pledge, you're going to go against the main powers of the whole country. You're going against the system. They turn around to him and they say to him, we know what's in it. We know that we're about to embark on a path of struggle, but his message is worth it. Palestine is worth it. Gaza is worth it. It's worth struggling for the sake of what is good and what is right. My dad called me and said to me, Sami, I heard your talk. And I expect him to say, yeah, Baba, was it okay? He said, yeah, but you didn't finish the story. You missed the whole crux of the issue. I said, what did you mean I missed the whole crux of the issue? He goes, you got to the part where Abbas expresses surprise, radiallahu anhu, and they say, we're not worried. But it's the next part, which is the whole point of it. I said, what next part? What did I miss? He says, tell me the story. Like, tell me, like, remember, ya Sami, go to the story. What happens afterwards? What do they say to the Prophet afterwards? I said, Baba, what did they say to the Prophet afterwards? Just to understand the point. He says, yes, Sami, remember they asked him, Ya Rasulullah, if we give you our full support, what is our reward if we... And my dad said to me on the phone, he goes to me, Sami, think about it. If Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said to them, your reward is every Khalifa only comes from Ansar, the Muslims would have accepted it. They would have said they deserve it. They gave him the support when other people weren't. They gave him Medina. They gave him whatever. They deserve the Khilafah. It should be for them. And it would have been normal in Arabia. But he didn't say that, Sami, did he? I said, no, Baba. He said, if he had said to them that the riches of Persia and Rome will be yours, the dunyawi thing. Would anybody have blamed him, Sami? I said, nobody would have blamed Rasulullah for doing it. We would have made it a fiqh that this would have been fine. Then Sami, what did they say to the Prophet and what did he say to them? They said to him, Ya Rasulullah, what's our reward if we're going to struggle for you? And he says to them, your reward is Al-Jannah. If I say to people, suffer for 2-3 years for the sake of Gaza, and you can beat Trump, just brace yourselves for it. We can weather the storm. We can weather it. We weathered it for 4 years already. You can weather it for the prize of punishing genocide. You can weather it. Already they say, no, show us a dunyawi outcome first. The Prophet says to Aus and Khadija, Al-Jannah, and they say that is sufficient for us. Punishing genocide is worth it for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. Punishing genocide is worth it because it's the right thing to do. To get justice for Sidra with her legs blown off from an airstrike, 6 years old, she's left hanging on the wall. It's worth struggling to get justice for her. It's worth struggling for 6-year-old Hind Rajab. She's in the car surrounded by the corpses of her family. She's in the car surrounded. She calls for the ambulance. The Israelis, they bomb the ambulance. They say, not even for a 6-year-old do we allow humanitarian aid. Then you see Reem, her grandfather is playing with her 6-year-old. He holds a Ya Ruh, spirit of my soul. Justice for her is worth it. It's worth to compromise for something. Genocide won't happen in America. Your houses won't be taken. What is it that you're so scared of? What is it you're so scared of? That means you are ready to forgive a genocide of 100,000 Palestinians. What is it you are so frightened of? It is nothing compared to what happened to the Palestinians and what happened to Gaza. The Ummah is not humiliated because the enemies humiliated it. It's humiliated because the Ummah, when it sees the bargain of Jannah versus Dunya, it always chooses Dunya. It always chooses the comfort of this life, because when you tell it to compromise it, even in comfort, because they won't suffer too much when they punish Joe Biden. When you tell them to punish Biden for the sake of genocide, they tell you in their comfortable sofa, is this really hikmah? And this is the point that I'm saying. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he transformed Quraysh with his voice and created an environment that led to Aus and Khazraj delivering Medina to him. And the reason they chased him when he made hijrah is because they said, if he can shift society this way, in which now Umar al-Khattab is leaving publicly, he's walking out of Quraysh and he's saying, guys, I'm of the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and I'm leaving Medina, I dare you to stop me. They couldn't touch him. They could touch the Muslims, they couldn't touch Umar al-Khattab, because the da'wah resonated with Umar al-Khattab so much, it resonated with his heart that he embraced it wholeheartedly. And that's the message that I'm saying here. That is perspective of power. You said, how do we follow geopolitics? It's not about that. It's rather, go back to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran. They are political books, because when you read them with the other eye open, not the spiritual eye, you other eye. I don't believe in spiritual versus public. It's a very Christian concept, which is why many Christians, when they embrace Islam, they love the whole of Islam. If you open the other eye and read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you will see parallels with what's happening today, particularly with regards to the first 13 years of the da'wah. You will see parallels of today. What I am imploring Muslims to do is to recognize the power of their voice, recognize the power of the da'wah, recognize the ability to shift hearts. Because in the US and the UK, your power is not that you are able to punish labor alone. Your power is that when social media allowed you to convey your da'wah to the rest of the country listened. The rest of the country heard you, and the one who you thought could never be shifted or could never be moved was moved, so much so that they agreed to punish the incumbents for Gaza, even though they had no ethnic or religious link with the Palestinians, even though they had no, and that's the point. And this is the final point I'll make on this. There's a professor, I saw him on TikTok, may Allah protect and preserve it, inshallah. Somebody said to me in a masjid, we're making dua for TikTok. I said, yes. He said, why? It's fitna. And I said, don't tell people it's fitna publicly, because if you tell them it's fitna publicly, you're telling people you taught your algorithm to teach you fitna, that you watch fitna, so the algorithm learned that you like fitna, so it shows you. My algorithm doesn't show me fitna, alhamdulillah, because I taught it to show me football, Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldinho, and some of these other things. The point that I'm saying is that, why are the Israelis so worried? They're not worried about Biden or Trump in November. They're worried that American public opinion will shift so irreversibly that in the next 30 years, US will no longer support the Israelis. They are worried that they have lost the American public opinion. They've lost the ordinary individual. And they are worried that if Biden loses in November, they will say he lost because he supported Zionism. So the political parties will no longer give credit to Zionism in the way that they used to in the past. And I think that's a victory well worth securing. And that's why I think that the da'wah, the power of the da'wah, the ability to move people is the essence of Islam. If you want an outcome in your lifetime, remember that Hud alayhi salam, Salih alayhi salam, and these others, they didn't get the outcome in which society converted wholeheartedly to them. Allah destroyed their people. But their result, their success was not determined by their ability to convince everybody. Their result and success was determined by their willingness to continue striving to convince the society. If the English population are now hearing the message, and the Scots and the Welsh and the Irish and the American population are now hearing your message and they're being moved by it, logically, politically, strategically, the conclusion should be not to withdraw. It should be to hit the message home and deliver the punishment to Biden and to the Labour Party in the UK and US elections in a way which shows them that morality exists in every heart. And if you want to discard morality, we will remind society morality matters and that it is a political force to be reckoned with.
Sami Hamdi, that's really been an enlightening show. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your time. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.